Football, as we know it, is about to change. The Premier League has just scrapped the profit and sustainability rules and replaced it with something much scarier. Gone are the days of clubs dragging cases through legal appeals for 18 months. Gone are the days where you could save yourself with creative accounting, like selling your own hotel and moving money between the men's and women's teams. And gone are the days where points deductions are debated in a courtroom. Because starting in the 26-27 season, Premier League clubs will be monitored in real time. And if you overspend, you won't be waiting for an independent panel till next year. You'll be hit with an instant 6-point deduction, with more points to come based on how much you overspent by. And the scariest part is that breaking the rules doesn't just punish you today, it shrinks your future spending power, making it harder for those clubs to recover. So today, we're breaking down the 5 biggest changes coming to the Premier League's financial system, and why this might be the biggest change in English football since FFP was first introduced. Before we break down the 5 biggest changes, we need to understand what's actually replacing the old PSR system, because this isn't just a tweak, this is a complete rebuild of how the Premier League controls finances. So PSR was basically an accounting exercise that said, don't lose more than 105 million in 3 years, and if you do, we'll deal with it later. And while the rules sound simple on paper, they were a disaster in reality because Everton were hit with a 10-point deduction in November 2023 for breaches that happened in the season before that, only for those deductions to be reduced to 6 points upon an appeal by Everton. Nottingham Forest were deducted 4 points in March 2024, even though their breaches happened in the previous season as well. And finally, Chelsea with their financial gymnastics to sell themselves hotel, car parks, and various internal assets like the women's team just to offset some of their losses. PSR was a system where you could break rules in January and not be punished till the following Christmas. But from the 26-27 season onwards, that era ends because the Premier League has just announced 2 new systems to regulate club finances. The first is the SCR system, or squad cost ratio. This caps how much clubs can spend on their football-related expenses and is monitored in real time. And if you break these rules, you could potentially get an instant 6 points deduction. The second system is SSR, or sustainability and systemic resilience. You just know the McKinsey consultants that came up with these names were high-fiving each other when they agreed on this word salad. But SSR is basically the financial stress test to ensure clubs have enough cash, liquidity, and asset stability to survive real-world shocks like relegation or another COVID type event. But we're going to focus this video on the squad cost ratio because that is the real game changer. The first major change under SCR is that the Premier League now has a hard cap on squad spending, and for the first time it comes in 2 levels. Clubs can only spend 85% of their football-related revenue plus any net profit or loss from player sales. And SCR is very specific about what football-related revenue means. It includes matchday revenue, broadcasting and commercial revenue, prize money, any stadium events related to football, and net gains or losses from player sales. Nothing else counts within this supposed 500 million. And clubs can spend 85% of this football-related revenue on player wages, head coach wages, agent fees, and transfer amortization. So for example, if Tottenham make £500 million in football-related revenue, they can spend 425 million of that on football-related costs. And if a smaller team like Brighton makes only £200 million in football-related revenue, they can only spend 170 million of that in football-related costs. So the Premier League is reinforcing the fact that your spending now scales exactly with your football income. Under PSR, clubs could offset losses by selling hotels or playing accounting games. Under SCR, it's strictly about football money. Now here's where it gets interesting with the second level of spending limits, which is called the red threshold. Above the 85% green threshold, you get a buffer zone that goes up to 115% of football-related revenue. That is basically the absolute ceiling of spending that's allowed. The buffer zone is the Premier League's way of saying you can spend over 85% temporarily if you want to plan for the long term, recover from underperformance, or allow for transfers before revenues actually grow. So essentially, if you want to bet on yourself into making it into Europe next season. But this is a very slippery slope because if you cross the 115% threshold, there's an immediate 6-point deduction plus 1 extra point per £6.5 million that you overspend. So this is the first time the Premier League has hard-coded instant sporting sanctions into the spending rules, and I'm sure a few of the big clubs have already hired more lawyers to find loopholes. Now, the second biggest change to SCR is that the clubs will not be judged over a rolling 3-year period. Instead, they will be monitored throughout the season with 3 key checkpoints. The first one is called the monitoring round, held in October. The second one is called the compliance test, held on March 1st, and the final one is called the accounts confirmation test in June. So at the beginning of the season, clubs are asked to provide an estimate of the football revenue they will earn that season, and on 1st March, if their football-related costs are under the 85% green threshold, they are considered fully compliant. If they are between 85 and 115%, they fall into the yellow zone, which means they are subject to the June review and a possible fine. If they are seen to be above the 115% threshold in March, they get an automatic points deduction. So basically, under these rules, Everton and Forest would have received their points deductions immediately in the same season as the breaches, instead of waiting for months under financial uncertainty. There's another key aspect to this real-time monitoring and spending threshold that, in my opinion, changes the game for clubs throughout the Premier League, and that is the feedback loop. Under SCR, clubs have a dynamic reward and punishment system. If they overspend anything beyond the 85% threshold and up to and including the 115% mark, your red threshold reduces by the exact same margin next season. For example, if Tottenham has £500 million in football revenue, they are allowed to spend £425 million like we discussed earlier. If instead, they end up spending £500 million or 100% of footballing revenue on football-related costs, their red threshold next season decreases from 115% to 100% of football revenue. So essentially, the jeopardy of making the same mistakes in future seasons is much higher because you overspend by 15% again, and you're looking at an instant 6-point deduction. For Tottenham to get their red threshold back to 115%, they will have to stay below the green threshold. It doesn't matter if you're at 84%, 70%, or 50%, you will still only get your threshold improved by 10% up to the maximum of 15%. The main goal of this feedback loop is to stop clubs from running multi-year overspending cycles, but I have a feeling we're going to see one or two of the smaller clubs just do some wild stuff just to stay up and pay the price next season, so this is going to be very interesting. The next biggest change we need to talk about is the UEFA alignment, because I don't think people understand the impact this is going to have on the bigger clubs. Basically, UEFA also has a squad cost ratio, and theirs is much stricter at 70% of football-related revenue. So the clubs that make it into any European competition through the Premier League can essentially spend 15% less of their revenue in that season, which causes big issues for the traditional Big Six clubs and the best of the rest that usually get into Europe, like Newcastle, Villa, Brighton, Palace, and so on. Let's take a look at some real examples based on squad cost ratios this season. So this is the SCR of all 20 Premier League clubs except for Sunderland. We have these 6 clubs playing in the Champions League, then we have Villa and Forest playing in the Europa League, and we have Crystal Palace in the Conference League because of their FA Cup win, which put them in the Europa League, but their ownership issues put them in the Conference League. You guys know what I'm talking about. Out of these 9 teams, Chelsea, Palace, and Newcastle would be compliant according to the Premier League, but not according to UEFA. So these 3 specific clubs will get fined by UEFA by the end of the season unless they fix their problems. But when we look at Aston Villa and Forest, that's where the real jeopardy comes in. They're both above the UEFA rules by much bigger percentages, and they're also above the Premier League's thresholds. So they're going to get fined by UEFA at the end of this season, but if the SCR rules were applicable now, they'd also get a fine from the Premier League, and the next season their red thresholds would be reduced by 1% and 2% respectively. So these clubs really only have 2 choices. They either sell players or loan their big money earners in January, or just accept the fines and prepare for a season of financial austerity. The 5th big change we need to focus on seems like a personal shot at Chelsea and the financial voodoo they've been doing since Todd Boehly took over. Under PSR, you could basically break the rules on the football side and then patch the hole by doing something insane, like selling yourself a hotel, your own car park, your own women's team, or whatever Chelsea were doing at 3 a.m. with an Excel sheet and a prayer. But under SCR, none of that counts. only football related income goes into your spending limit and only football related costs count against it. There's no more of my cousin bought the stadium, so now we're fine. If your football operations lose money, your football operations get punished. Alright, so that wraps up the 5 biggest changes that you need to know about with SCR. There are way more details in the new regulations, so I'll leave all the official links in the description down below. And if you want us to break down all of the financial implications, especially for the bigger clubs, let me know in the comments down below and we'll try to cover it in the next episode of the Stat Patters podcast. Also, we're getting super close to 50,000 subscribers, so if you could please like the video and subscribe to the channel, that would be awesome. By the way, I'm working on a brand new Patrick Dorgu video that's going to come out as a members only exclusive, so if you want to support the channel and get access to some fun perks, please consider becoming a channel member. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.